Saints fans and who-dats from all over the world. It's time for the Bayou Blitz. With your host, Bob Rose.
Good evening, Saints fans, and happy Wednesday to Who Dat Nation and fans of the NFL everywhere. We thank you for joining us and welcoming us into your homes again on a Wednesday night, and welcome to the Bayou Blitz. I'm joined by my partner in crime, as always, Mr. Kyle Mosley. How are you tonight, Kyle?
I'm doing well, Mr. Rose. How things out there in Ohio?
Oh, real good, real good. Anybody that follows us probably knows we celebrated the 1-year birthday of my little son, William Anthony turned 1 year old yesterday, and we will have a party for him, friends and family members on Saturday. So we're looking forward to that. As crazy as that's going to be, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, man. Well, you wish my little guy a happy birthday for me, man. I'll try to send him a little gift as well. You guys should have a great time.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And everybody keeps telling me, and Lord knows they don't have to tell me. A year goes by fast, so a lot has changed. As followers of the Bayou Blitz probably know, he's our sometimes loud third guest in the background from week to week. So I'm sure we'll be hearing his opinion at some point tonight. But things are going all right down there with you?
Yeah, well, it's hot in Houston. It's always a sauna these days, but everything's going along pretty well, man. Just can't wait. The season is right upon us. A few days before training camp. Man, gosh, you can just smell it. And you know what else smells? We got some Bucs guys in the queue with us. We're going to chat it up with these NFC South
I couldn't have asked for a better intro. But yeah, Kyle, you're right. And football is in the air. I think every single fan of every professional team it just wants to fast forward the next 2 weeks and get all of our teams into training camp. So with that celebration in mind, we welcome our two very special guests, two guys I've been really looking forward to having us on. And they do indeed cover the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, one of the Saints NFC South rivals. But from the Locked On Bucs podcast, we welcome James Yarcho and David Harrison. Gentlemen, how are you tonight?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
Hey.
Doing great. Yeah, I appreciate you having us on.
Welcome aboard, friends. Welcome aboard. Friends for now, foes later.
And we do have a lot to cover, but I imagine you guys added a lot of new faces to your team this off season as well. So I'm sure you're excited to see them, in uniform and in full pads, getting ready for that first game also.
Oh yeah, for sure. A lot of the excitement is surrounded around the defense. With the complete overhaul that Jason Light did with the defensive line, bringing in Jason Pierre-Paul and Vinnie Curry and Bo Allen and drafting Vita Vea. That was probably one of the biggest glaring problems for the Bucs last year was there was no pass rush, let alone no sacks, but no pass rush at all. So, there's a lot of excitement for what the defense can turn into this year.
Oh yeah, no question about it. And a lot of what I wanted to cover tonight does center around your defense for sure, because you guys added some interesting and potentially devastating pieces for those of us that are Saints fans. But first, I want to get to the elephant in the room. Both your squad and ours are going to be missing a key piece of our offenses. Leading up to our showdown in Week 1. Saints fans, of course, know that running back Mark Ingram has been suspended for the first 4 games of the NFL season. But perhaps more important on you guys and your quarterback, Jameis Winston, has been suspended for the first 3 games. Do you guys want to get us caught up real quick on what led up to that suspension and what's kind of going around, what kind of buzz is going around that team right now?
Yeah, just kind of the Reader's Digest version for anyone who may not be aware of everything that happened was back in March of 2016, Jameis Winston was in an Uber, and the driver of the Uber alleged that he groped her inappropriately, and the story of the accuser didn't come out until November of last year. And then, of course, the NFL did their investigation. It appears as if there was some sort of plea bargain agreement between the NFL and the NFLPA, which is why Winston is only serving the 3 games instead of the usual 6 for something like this. At the end of the day, nobody truly knows what happened. People were saying that there was more than just Jameis in the car. Turns out there was 2 different Uber rides. This one was when Winston was by himself. He's eliminated alcohol from his life. That happened long before actually the story even broke in November of last year. So obviously that played a huge factor in what happened, not making an excuse for him. If what he was alleged to have done actually took place, there's no excuse for it. But at this point, the Buccaneers, the fans, everybody's ready to just kind of move on, get past it, and see what 2018 holds for Winston when he returns week 4.
And guys, one of the things that I've been dying to ask you too, everything that I've read and seen is that the Buccaneer fan base and certainly the Buccaneers organization is standing behind their quarterback, especially at first because, like you said, his details about what actually happened are pretty sketchy, especially, and will continue to be so as long as there has been a settlement of some sort behind the scenes. But I've been curious, have you guys heard anything about the Buccaneers still having Jameis in their long-term plans? I believe they just inked him to the 5th-year contract extension, but some rumors throughout the league, are the Buccaneers getting ready to give up on Jameis Winston or everything like that? And like I said, nothing that I've seen or heard would indicate that. But what are you guys hearing and being a lot closer to the team?
Well, like you said, the team picked up his 5th-year option. That's not actually guaranteed outside of injury until the beginning of the next league year. So they actually have a little bit of wiggle room there. Of course, like I said, barring injury to Jameis Winston to potentially get out of that if they decide to. But as of right now, there's no sign coming out of one Buck and coming out of any media sources or anybody close to the team to say that they're leaning in that direction. There are definitely some fans who have kind of jumped ship, so to speak, and kind of washed their hands of Jameis Winston. But, I'm sure it's the same with a lot of fan bases. We've got certain groups of our fan base who are certain types of people. And there's fans who just never bought into Jameis Winston to begin with, and then, of course, this just kind of adds fuel to that fire for them, and so on. But everything coming out of one Buck, like his teammates, there have been multiple teammates who have kind of come up and said, the Jameis that we know, the Jameis that we rely on, is not the person that would do these sorts of things and all that stuff. So everything coming out of the franchise is really, it's not a lot. And granted, I'm sure there's been some information put out on be careful what you say and how you say things and so on. But everything that is coming out is at least leaning towards we support Jameis at least in the minimal sense.
Well, at the risk of getting too personal, if there is such a thing with what we do, want to put a general manager's hat on each of you guys. Winston was the number 1 overall pick in 2015, of course, as most of us know. And when you pick, especially a quarterback that high, that's your franchise centerpiece. Given what has happened with Winston, throughout his career, even dating back to college, there have been a lot of allegations. Very little of them have led to anything serious. A lot of he said, she said situations, and I'm not discounting what has happened in this instance or anything like that. So nobody misunderstand me, please. But given what you've seen from him on the field too, and let's not forget, we're still talking football here. General manager's cap on each of you. What would you do with Jameis Winston?
Me personally, you got to ride it out. Jameis is already arguably the best quarterback in franchise history. Now, I realize that's not saying much. This is a team that has had more starting quarterbacks than they've had years in the NFL. It's the same team that traded away Steve Young. It's the same team that, drafted Josh Freeman and Trent Dilfer and Vinny Testaverde and, the laundry list of just terrible quarterbacks. But to me, if I'm Jason Light, or if Jason Light were to lose his job after a subpar 2018 and I'm the next general manager, Jameis Winston's on razor thin ice. I mean, so much as accidentally sneezing on the neck of an old lady in line at Publix could get him the boot. He has to be the model citizen, the model employee, the model player, in every aspect. And with enough time, and it was something that I wrote for Bucs Nation, with enough time, this kind of thing can be forgiven. We've seen it with Ben Roethlisberger. We've seen it with Kobe Bryant. We've seen it with Ray Lewis. We've seen it with these other players that had this huge, massive black eye placed on them for something that they did or, allegedly did. And with enough time getting past it, doing the right thing, saying the right things, succeeding in their profession, the fans started to kind of put it on the back burner and say, all right, maybe it was just a mistake. Maybe it didn't really happen, things of that nature. But in order to get to that point, Jameis has to be virtually a perfect human for the fans and the general public to start to accept that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that at this point, franchise quarterbacks we hear it every year in the NFL draft. Quarterbacks get taken near the top of the draft because you have to have a franchise quarterback to be successful in the league, according to a lot of people. And the mass majority of them just don't ever shake out to be franchise quarterbacks. So if you have the opportunity to bring a franchise quarterback into your team, into your locker room, even, barring just some ridiculous amount of evidence of something just extremely egregious, you kind of have to see where it all plays out and give them the chance to rebound and come back and see if things can shake out the way you want them to, because not only with the personal side of things and the off-field stuff too, but even on the field, it's important for people to remember that this is a quarterback who had a throwing shoulder injury for most of last year, and I'm still not 100% convinced that when he did come back after sitting out to try to heal up, that he was actually 100%. I know football players play at under 100% most of the time, if not all the time. So this is a young man who was on an upward trajectory as a player on the field before he suffered that injury. And so, like I said, you just kind of looking just from a football standpoint and a franchise standpoint, the opportunities to have a franchise quarterback in your building just don't come around enough to cut the string, so early and kind of have kind of an emotional reaction to everything that's going on. I know that's not a great way to say things, but that's kind of the business side of this whole thing. A lot of people have pointed out the more successful you are, and that's kind of what James is alluding to, the more successful you are in our society, the more things can be forgiven, so to speak. And whether that's right or morally correct or not is a whole other debate that we can have at another time. But that's just kind of the culture we live in right now. So looking at that, you have to see if this is going to pan out with Jameis Winston if you're Jason Light.
Now, that's both of you. That's a great way to put it. I don't envy the position that you're in, especially with the franchise quarterback. But at the same time, you got to love some of the tools that Jameis has flashed on the field. He definitely has some physical tools. His leadership ability of an offense, both at Florida State and since he's been in Tampa Bay, he's flashed some impressive abilities. But nonetheless, obviously, you're now going to be without your starting quarterback for the first 3 games, and you guys face a murderer's row. You obviously open up at New Orleans, like we're talking about, and then you have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, both at home, but all three playoff teams. Now, everybody is assuming that Ryan Fitzpatrick is going to step in and take the reins as a backup quarterback, and he does bring a lot of experience. And my oldest daughter, who has a serious man crush on Mr. Ryan Griffin, asked me to ask you guys this question. So, Brianna, if you're listening, I told you I would. does Ryan Griffin stand a realistic chance, or is this job fits us for the first 3 games unless something disastrous happens?
Well, if you go back to last year, during training camp, Ryan Griffin was outperforming Ryan Fitzpatrick throughout training camp. And there started to be some rumblings at perhaps Fitzpatrick may end up being the odd man out. Ryan Griffin really, really stepped up. I happened to be at that first preseason game against the Bengals when Griffin went out with a shoulder injury, and he was basically done for the rest of the season. Now, even with the injury, Jason Light signed him to an extension. So there's something there that Jason Light and the coaching staff believes in. And he did show some signs of being able to handle a role, as a backup. I wouldn't say that he was, blowing anybody's doors off and was going to be a starter and sign a Mike Glennon in Chicago style contract, but he was playing well enough to beat out Ryan Fitzpatrick. The other problem is he was doing it in practices. He was doing it in portions of the preseason. He has yet to ever take a meaningful snap in the NFL, so we don't know what he could do up against a New Orleans starting defense or an Eagles starting defense. It may be a complete disaster. So I wouldn't say that it's just going to be handed to Fitzpatrick, but I would say that the smart money is on Fitzpatrick beating out Ryan Griffin for the starting job for those first 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree there. And when Fitzpatrick was brought back, I think a lot of the motivation to bring Ryan Fitzpatrick back this year probably had to do with the, looming situation hanging over Jameis Winston. Because I'm 100% convinced these franchises and the insiders, of course, know more than the rest of us do, obviously. And when information is put out, this has probably been kind of on their desk for some time now. So they were able to anticipate having this situation where Jameis wasn't going to be on the field for a period of time. So going into the season with Ryan Fitzpatrick as your starter and Ryan Griffin as your backup versus going into the season with Ryan Griffin as your starter and I don't know, who they would bring in to be the backup in that situation. That's obviously not a good situation. I still think Ryan Griffin has a future with the Bucs, like James just said, or else they wouldn't have re-signed him. But I think looking at these first 3 games, barring disaster, barring injury, barring 6 interception Ryan Fitzpatrick, I think that's who we'll see the veteran on the field over Griffin.
And we saw kind of the same sort of thing play out in New Orleans with Ryan Griffin in the preseason in 2015. Obviously, Breeze was your unquestioned starter, but the number 2 job was actually pretty hotly contested between Griffin and Luke McCown. A lot of people, myself included, and obviously my daughter, felt that Griffin had outplayed McCown, but for reasons that you guys just laid out, you need to feel confident. And if you do have to turn to a backup, you need to feel confident that the guy stepping in is going to have at least some NFL experience. So you almost got to feel bad for Ryan Griffin in this case, but I definitely agree with what you guys pointed out with Fitzpatrick. So we got our obligatory Ryan Griffin question out of the way. So I love you, Brianna. So thank you for that. Guys, before we get to the defense, though, one of the bigger problems that the Buccaneers offense has had, a lot of people have felt over the last, basically Jameis Winston's 3-year career, they have been able to move the ball up and down the field and between the 20s at will. And we're right up there. I think they were 2nd or 3rd in the league in total first downs and 4th in total yardage, but near the middle of the pack in points. A lot of that can be pointed to the running game, and Tampa Bay parted ways with Martin in the offseason and felt like that some felt that they sort of have reached for Ronald Jones, a very productive and talented back from USC. But what did you guys see out of Jones at OTAs and minicamp, and how did you feel about the pick?
Well, everything coming out of minicamps and everything is positive, but and Coach Cutter said it a lot in his interviews. It's important to remember that everybody's in shorts and t-shirts for the most part right now. The pads haven't gone on yet, and Buccaneers fans, we brought it up on our own podcast. The legend of Kenny Bell, who's a guy that in shorts and t-shirts looks like an all-star, looks like a Pro Bowler, but as soon as the pads go on and the hitting is real, just disappears and fades into nothing. So everybody's a little bit, I don't want to say paranoid, but it's kind of a wait and see type of thing that, everything that we've seen so far is reassuring and positive, but we haven't seen anything real just yet. So kind of waiting to reserve judgment there. But as far as the pick is concerned, I don't know. I thought that, I think everybody pretty much expected the Buccaneers to take a running back there in the second round once the first round expired and they didn't trade back in or do anything like that. Ronald Jones honestly wasn't one of our favorites to be completely honest, but when all the stuff with Darius Guy started coming out during the draft and right before the draft, and you kind of saw him tumble down the board, it became more of a real situation that Ronald Jones could be the pick. And I don't see anything wrong with it. There's a lot that he brings to the table. I don't think he's going to be a 3-down back as a rookie. I don't really even think it's really all that smart for an NFL franchise to try to make a rookie running back a 3-down back. But I think they have a perfect complement with Peyton Barber to be able to kind of make a poor man's Mark Ingram, Alvin Kamara combination. I don't think they're going to be as electric and explosive necessarily, but kind of, the Tampa version of that, trying to build that. And, who knows, in 2 or 3 years, that duo there could turn into something really valuable for this team.
Yeah, it's something that has been a glaring problem for quite a while. So, a lot of us are excited about what Ronald Jones can potentially do for this team. A lot of the players spoke after OTAs and minicamp about how excited they are as to what Ronald Jones can bring to the offense, the explosiveness that he has. Dirk Cutter preaches, he wants explosive plays. Well, Ronald Jones is the kind of running back that can, take the ball right up the middle and turn it into an explosive play. So, yeah, there is some excitement, but as David said, there is some trepidation because we've seen that explosiveness in OTAs and minicamp before, whereas when when they're playing for real, some guys crumble up and they aren't that same player, i.e. Kenny Bell, as David mentioned. Aurelius Ben was kind of another one. So it's a wait-and-see approach. It's very cautious optimism.
Definitely a fair point. Do you guys see or have anybody on your radar, especially on the offensive side, see anybody that you expect to make a real jump in productivity or improvement in play this year? I'm a big fan of Chris Godwin. David, we were messaging back and forth during the draft last season that I was hoping New Orleans would get him. So I'm extremely high on Chris Godwin. But do you guys see anybody that you really expect to step forward and have a productive role for Tampa Bay this season?
I think you're going to see
Chris Godwin is
Go ahead, David.
Go ahead, James. No, go ahead.
I was going to say I think you're going to see a boost out of O.J. Howard. I think he's going to take that next step. He's a phenomenal athlete, a phenomenal talent, and something that I was saying on our podcast the other day was, O.J. Howard gets a little bit of backlash from fans. Number one, because so many Buccaneers fans are also Florida State fans, and they wanted Dalvin Cook. Much like Vita Vea is getting that backlash because he's not Derwin James. But when you take a look at O.J. Howard's numbers compared to that of other rookie tight ends, whether it be Gronk or Kelsey or Rudolph or whoever you want to mention, it's pretty much on par. It takes a little while for a collegiate tight end to really become a dominant force in the NFL. So I think you're going to see that gradual next step for OJ, and he's going to become a bigger factor in the offense than he was his rookie season, which was already a very good season. But the combination between him and Cam Brate, I think Cam Brate ends up with more receptions and more touchdowns because he is that safety valve. He is that red zone target. But O.J. Howard is just so explosive and so fast and creates nightmarish mismatches for the defense that I think you're going to see him utilized quite a bit.
Yeah, OJ is definitely a guy that we all have our eye on, and like you were talking about with Godwin, everything is pointing to Chris Godwin having kind of an opportunity to have a kind of a breakout year. I mean, Mike Evans is still the undisputed number one there in Tampa. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. But Chris Godwin and who the number two of the future is going to be is definitely something that's up in the air. And I think this could be a year where Chris Godwin really kind of cements himself as that future number two. And I'm just really excited. Hopefully, there's been some word out of Buccaneers mini camps and stuff that they're trying some new things that they really didn't use last year and trying to put some new wrinkles into their offense. And hopefully one of those things is finding a way to get Chris Godwin on the field, because I really like how he kind of balances the offense when he's on the field. You got Mike Evans over there who's big, long, he's strong. He can really kind of post up guys and make plays with his body, whereas you got Deshaun Jackson who's the quick speedster guy who can make quick cuts and get upfield and exploit defenses that way. And I look at Chris Godwin, and he's shorter, and he's not as long, but he's still a pretty big guy himself. He's still got pretty good length to him, but he's also got some quickness to him. So I kind of look at him as kind of that mixture of the two, so to speak. And I think that if the Buccaneers find ways to get him in space or kind of exploit some of the formations and the route combinations to really be able to get him free, that we're going to see a lot of plays from him this year.
Oh, excellent. Before we jump over to the defensive side, I wanted to ask you guys, you poll different teams through the NFC South. I think 99.9% of the New Orleans Saints fans would tell you that their most hated rival is the Atlanta Falcons, maybe followed by the Carolina Panthers. Falcons fans would say the same thing about the Saints. Panthers fans are sort of divided. Who is the Buccaneers' biggest rival in this division, especially from a fan base standpoint? Because the teams, I realize they look at each other pretty much the same way. Rivalries are more fan than team. But yeah, I've always been curious who Tampa Bay's chief rival is in this NFC South.
I think you could ask 99 different Buccaneers fans, and you would get 33 picks for each of the teams. There really isn't that standout team that collectively Buccaneers fans hate more than the other. I know for me personally, going way back to the Jake Delhomme days, it's been the Panthers. I've always hated the Panthers the most, then the Falcons, then the Saints. But I think it's kind of different for everyone, especially geographically. You have a lot of Bucs fans that hate the Falcons more than anyone else. You have, ones that are out of state like myself, and I hate the Panthers the most. And of course, Cam Newton doesn't help matters any. And I'll be honest, when they realigned these divisions, as a former member of the black and blue division, I always hated Green Bay the most. You had that Favre and Sapp rivalry. I still to this day despise the Packers. My stepson's a huge Packers fan. And so he and I go at it all the time. My other stepson is a Vikings fan, just to pick on his brother, that kind of thing. But when they realigned the divisions, I don't think we really took on any kind of like major disdain for any of the other teams, because at that point in time, Tampa Bay was light years ahead of the other three teams. Carolina was still pretty new to the league. They weren't great. New Orleans was still struggling. They were still the Aints, and it was long before Drew Brees. And it didn't really stick with anyone. The Falcons had the one good year, but that was, when they lost to the Broncos in the Super Bowl, but nobody was really afraid of them. So it wasn't until the Buccaneers started getting beaten down that, a lot of fans really started to take on that true rivalry hatred. So I really think you could ask, like I said, 99 different fans, and you'll get 33 of each team.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, I think some of it has to do with geography a little bit too. Like, if you're a Buccaneers fan living in Georgia, you probably hate the Falcons, but that's because that's what you're surrounded with. So obviously you want to fight that. But I mean, I guess like if I was going to answer that question, I guess personally it would be the Panthers for most of the same reasons that James mentioned, but also just because there's really not any players in Carolina right now that I really like. Was kind of like quote unquote my guy. Whereas like with the Saints, when Michael Thomas was coming through the draft process, I was, kind of banging the table, figuratively saying, this dude is so underrated and so on and so forth. And you look at the Falcons, and guys like Deion Jones was another guy that year that he came out where I saw a lot of potential in him and really didn't understand why he was being projected as low as he was. I mean, he's not a seventh rounder, but still lower than I felt his value was, and he's shown. So it's kind of hard to hate the team when you got guys on the roster where, outside of the weeks they play the Buccaneers, I'm happy to see them having success. But a lot like James said, I mean, I don't like the Packers. I don't like the Vikings. I mean, I don't like the Lions. I don't like the Bears. Like, honestly, like, as a writer and as a person on podcasts and so on, when we're talking about the league and we're talking about playoff teams, when that time of the season comes, I actually have to fight a little bit of a bias personally, because I look at the NFC North and I'm just kind of like, you're good, whatever, like, go over there. But in reality, we have, like, the Vikings defense was very dominant last year. Aaron Rodgers is obviously one of the best quarterbacks in the league. Even, I guess Matt Stafford's pretty good. So, but I have to actively fight kind of that bias because my gut instinct is to look at those teams in the NFC North and just go, whatever, I can take you or leave you. So I think, that kind of sits with a lot of Bucs fans in that aspect.
See, I thought I was the only one. I usually show my age when it comes to Tampa Bay conversations with New Orleans Saints fans, because I still close my eyes and picture the Battle of the Bays or Tampa Bay lining up in Old Soldier Field or Walter Payton running against Tampa Bay in the creamsicle uniforms, that kind of thing. So I still picture that when I think of Tampa Bay myself. Listen, you guys alluded to some of the off-season changes on the defensive end, particularly the defensive line. First and foremost, they added a new, I think it is the first year, Brenton Buckner, to coach the defensive line. But you had a complete remake. Clinton McDonald, Robert Ayers, Chris Baker all gone. Jason Pierre-Paul, Vinnie Curry, and Bo Allen all in. And that's the couple with a front line already with that monster Gerald McCoy, William Golston, and Spence. Do you guys think these changes are for the better, or do you think it's just going to be a lot of the same old up front?
Well, I would definitely say it's for the better. I mean, they could have replaced Chris Baker with me, and it would have been an improvement because Chris Baker is the most useless human on planet Earth, and I've had my spouts with him on Twitter. I can't wait to see him in Cincinnati this year. But yeah, I mean, you have two guys coming off of a Super Bowl championship. They have that winning mentality. They know what it takes, and they can bring that to Tampa. You have Gerald McCoy, which it's mind-boggling how many Buccaneers fans hate on the guy when he's one of the best defensive tackles in football. But you still have all these fans. He disappears in the fourth quarter. He's soft. He smiles too much. Why is he helping guys off the field? Like, that's the kind of stuff that we deal with. I don't know how you guys perceive Gerald McCoy outside of this fan base, but one would think that when opposing teams see the Buccaneers defensive line lining up against their offense, they think, just for the love of God, stop Gerald McCoy. Like, he's that big of an impact. And you can go all the way back to McCoy's rookie year, and he's never really had any help. They bring in Michael Johnson, who is one of the biggest free agency busts in Buccaneers history, which is saying something, when they would bring in Alvin Harper and all these other guys, and Deshaun Goldson, and I know he was a trade, but Darrelle Revis was a bust in Tampa. And Michael Johnson provided no help. They haven't had a double-digit sack player since Simeon Rice. I mean, that kind of tells you the help that Gerald McCoy has had around him. So when you're facing double and triple teams constantly, you're not going to get those double-digit sacks. So now he's got Vinnie Curry to help him. He's got Jason Pierre-Paul to help him. He's got Vita Vea, who's going to clog up some players, and he's going to split time with Bo Allen, who is an incredibly effective player. I mean, he's not a world beater by any means, but he is good at what he does. Then you have kind of the forgotten man in Noah Spence, who suffered the shoulder injury his rookie season, re-injured that same shoulder last season, and he's bulked up a lot yet again. I mean, going into last season, he had trimmed down a lot. He looked like a picture of like those health books that you had in middle school and high school when it showed the human body without any skin and all the ripped muscles. Like, that was what he looked like. He was just a monster but he wasn't big enough. He was the size of a small linebacker at that point. So he's put some of that weight back on to get back over to defensive end and be able to rush the passer. So I think they have the makings of a very effective defensive line. It's going to be on Buckner to get that out of them. And that might be one of the best offseason acquisitions that the Buccaneers made, seeing the passion that this guy has, seeing that nobody is off limits when it comes to criticism and getting in their face and getting them to realize what they're doing wrong. He chewed out Gerald McCoy for almost a minute. It was somebody at one of the OTAs had filmed it and put it up on Twitter that he was in McCoy's face, and you just saw, the look on McCoy's face was, I know I screwed up. I know that's my bad. It was something as simple as jumping off sides. And, Buckner was getting all over these guys. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic when you see what Buckner is doing for this defensive line and what Mike Smith is telling him to do. Because Buckner has been very vocal of the fact that I don't want to see any stunts. I don't want to see any twists. Just put your head down, knock the guy on his butt that's standing right in front of you, and get after the quarterback, whereas Mike Smith was trying to get real cute last season, and he was running all kinds of crazy stunts and moving guys around, and Buckner's one of those, just put your head down and go. So it'll be interesting to see how they play out that dynamic and kind of which one is going to overtake the other, because in my opinion, Mike Smith is on as thin of ice as Jameis Winston is. And if he doesn't have a serious improvement in his defense, Buckner is going to take his job, regardless of if Dirk Cutter is there or it's a new head coach.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate what James said. I think Coach Buckner might be the signing or the steal of the offseason, to be quite honest with you. But I kind of look at it and I think that the key upgrade to the defensive line, honestly, is going to be resiliency, because I feel like this was a defensive unit last year just got beat down, and they took a lot of flack. Some of it well deserved, some of it not so much. But they took a lot of heat from the media, from the fans, obviously in the loss column. So that's never good. And towards the end of the season, I think everybody can agree Chris Baker pretty much checked out of Tampa. He may have recently just left this calendar year, but he was gone before the end of before we hit New Year's. And I think what we see coming into this defensive line is a whole lot of resilient personalities. I mean, you look at guys like Vinny Curry and Bo Allen. These are two guys who survived the Chip Kelly era in Philadelphia. And I know that locker room could not have been a comfortable place to be. But meanwhile, during that time period, Vinny Curry is getting 4 sacks one year, 9 sacks another year. Consistently producing at least some numbers, and Bo Allen is quietly kind of being the workhorse that he was for the team, and just kind of being a constant presence there. And so these are guys who understand what it's like to be in a not so comfortable situation all the time, but still be able to persevere and come through it on the other end as champions. And then you look at Jason Pierre-Paul. I mean, we all make jokes, and I know there were jokes around the 4th of July. Of course, there's going to be. He himself even posted pictures of his injuries to kind of remind people that, hey, you might laugh a little bit, but this is real, and, so on and so forth. This is a guy who's come back, and, there's some knocks on him on whether or not he shows up in the biggest moments of the game, or, how many of his sacks were garbage sacks, and so on and so forth. But you can't deny the fact that this is a guy who came back from an injury where a lot of people in his position probably wouldn't have had a career to follow on with. So the fact that he's been able to come on, be an NFL starter, and be effective as he has is a testament to his personality. And, of course, Gerald McCoy, you don't get much more resilient than a guy like Gerald McCoy. So I think that's really what we're probably going to see is with this new defensive line and with these new additions, and then with a coach like Coach Buckner, who's, I don't see his personality ever fading away. I don't care if it's 42-0 in the second quarter. I still believe he's going to be in there kicking his guys' butts, making them, try to push as hard as they can to get sacks and stop the ball carrier. So I think that's kind of the big thing that I see on the defensive line that I'm really looking forward to seeing, because last year we just didn't have that. Some of these guys out there, I think the team, I'm not saying the team quit, but there are definitely some people who were supposed to be leaned on that definitely didn't deliver on their part of their contract.
David, you were a lot more politically correct about Chris Baker than what James was. I like what he said better.
So James and Chris have gone back and forth on Twitter, so I let them have that beef. I just watch and laugh.
I had flashbacks of my, some of the things that I'd say about Jarius Byrd and Brandon Browner on this end. So I respect that a lot. But a couple things I wanted to ask you on the defensive end too. But you guys both brought it up, and it was a question I was going to ask you anyway about obviously how hot is the seat under Dirk Cutter. But I also wanted to specify about Mike Smith. Obviously, we're all familiar of him from his defense, from his play in Atlanta as the head coach too. And let's just say he's not known for his teams being hard-nosed, especially in big situations. And now that Tampa has brought in Brenson Buckner, who has a completely different coaching mentality. He coaches like he still wants to suit up and go out there and play. So who's on more of a hot seat here? Is it Mike Smith or is it Cutter?
I think they're together. I think they're sharing the same seat. I don't think they sit in different seats in this situation. And I wrote about it a little bit earlier this offseason, basically talking about no more excuses. And I'm not the only person who said that. I think there was actually a Buccaneers player who came out. I think it might have been McCoy who came out and said, there's no more time for excuses. And it kind of sparked me to write this thing. And it's 100% correct. I mean, it's a lot of people have complaints about today's NFL, right, where head coaches really don't get the time all the time like you used to see to really build a team and really develop, your foundation and so on and so forth. But, I mean, I don't know, blame it on society. It is what it is. And you look at Dirk Cutter's first season coming in, he had a young quarterback, a young nucleus, and a young team. And so the whole mantra was kind of like the ship is turning. Like we're getting on track. We're getting to where we need to be. So it was okay to not make the playoffs. It was okay to not see postseason action again. And then last year happened, but everybody thought the ship was on the right course, and we were finally going to see this team take that next step. And the excuse then was, well, there were a lot of injuries, and the ownership group actually even kind of referenced those injuries when they were questioned by the Tampa Bay Times on why they kept the coaching staff. It was kind of like, well, we want to give them the chance to see what they can do with the roster intact versus having all these injuries, because they did lose some key personnel. There were some key players hurt throughout the season, and I'll give them that. But that was kind of the quote-unquote excuse given to justify why they get this third try at it. But this is it. I mean, and even with the Jameis Winston suspension, like that, you can't lean on those 3 games and say, well, had Jameis Winston not been suspended, we could the time for excuses is over. And I think it's both of them. It's either they make the playoffs and they stay, or they miss the playoffs and they're both gone next year.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I would say if you had to pick one that was hotter, it's Mike Smith. But they're essentially tied at the hip. And we saw it with Lovie Smith when ownership approached him and said, look, you need to make these personnel changes to your coaching staff. He said no, and he was shown the door. That's how Dirk Cutter, ends up being the head coach. And, I, as a University of Illinois fan, I have yet to watch a football game that Lovie Smith has coached because I already knew what was coming. He brought with him the majority of the coaching staff that he had in Tampa, including his sons, and they went from a top 5 passing defense in all of college football to a bottom 3 in Lovie's first year. Like, that's what he does. So when ownership approached him and said, make these changes or you're gone, he was loyal to a fault. And I think you would probably ultimately see that same thing with Dirk Cutter. He brought in his guys. He brought in Mike Smith, who gave him a chance to, be a coach in Atlanta, and they coached together in Jacksonville. And, they have that long history, and some of these coaches are, like I said, they're loyal to a fault. So at the end of the day, I think they're tied together. I would say if one of them were to stay, it would more than likely be Cutter. But at the end of the day, when Jason Light is faced with a decision of, well, I can either fire these coaches because we have way too much talent to not make the playoffs, or the Glazers are going to fire me, and then the coaches and then bring in a new GM, Jason Light's he's gonna save his own butt. And I think Jason Light deserves to stay. I think he's done a good job as general manager. I don't think the coaching has been there. I would have been perfectly fine with a coaching change this past offseason. I'm also pretty much okay with them staying and giving it one more shot. But yeah, like David said, I mean, this is the time for excuses is over. They have to win now regardless of Jameis' situation. And if they don't make the postseason, I think we're looking at major changes.
Do either of you see a scenario? I mean, we talked about, obviously, Jameis is going to be out for the first 3 games, and we talked about who you're playing in those first 3 games. But outside of that, do either of you see a scenario where the Tampa front office could make a change to a major change to their coaching staff in midseason, or would they let this thing play out through the regular season?
They'll let it play out. The Glazers have never made a coaching change in season. It won't start now. Yeah, that's kind of their MO. It doesn't matter how bad things are getting. They're going to stick with it until the end of the season. They'll evaluate everything, and that's when they'll make the change. So, I mean, I truly believe that this team could start 0-13, and Dirk Cutter and Mike Smith will still be trotting out there in week 15. Just because that's kind of the precedent that's been set, and until otherwise, I don't believe it would change.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that's the way the Glazers really like to do things. I think it's once you push off into the season, it's a done deal until the end of that year.
The team Buccaneers drafted Vernon Hargreaves, a highly touted cornerback from Florida, with the 16th overall pick in 2016. Now Hargreaves has been dinged up, but even when he's been on the field, he's been inconsistent at best. Where's he stand with the team right now? Because like I said, he's been in the league a few years. He's had a chance to show his stuff, at least as far as downs played. How the coaching staff feel about Vernon Hargreaves? Are they comfortable with him?
Well, everything, I mean, right now still points to him getting the opportunity to prove himself outside. I know during some of the minicamp sessions, he was playing inside when they were in their sub packages, but when they were in their base package, he was still on the field as the outside defender. And I've said several times on the Locked On Bucs podcast, it makes sense from an organizational standpoint because this is a guy, he's the first round draft pick that followed Jameis Winston. So his 5th round option or 5th year option is in play next offseason. So this team, just like you have to figure out what you have in your potential franchise quarterback, you have to figure out what you have in your first round cornerback. The Chicago Bears went through this with Fuller just the year prior, where it was, kind of a make or break season. If you don't show us what we need to see to have confidence in you to be an outside defender for our defense long term, then we're not going to pick up your 5th year option. Basically puts you in a contract situation where you're either going to be a bust and you're going to go somewhere else, or you're going to, resurrect your career, which Fuller was able to do, and, be rewarded for it quite handsomely. And my opinion is that that's what they're doing. They're gonna push Hargreaves to the outside as long as they can, which really I think is week 2, 3, or 4 of the preseason. If he's just not getting it done, then that's when I think that's possibly when the trigger will be pulled. Maybe he gets to start the regular season on the outside. They didn't wait too long, honestly. It was Buffalo. I can't remember off the top of my head which week that was, but it was pretty early in the season that the Bucs defense went ahead. Mike Smith went ahead, made the change, pushed him to the inside. He did get better once he moved to the inside. But again, like I said before, you're not picking up a 5th year option on a slot corner, on a slot defender. You're just not going to pay that kind of money for a slot defender. So if that's where they end up putting him, and if that's where he ends up showing them he deserves to play, then he's likely not getting his 5th year option picked up. Most first round draft picks that don't have their 5th year options picked up are probably going to get the bust label. But it doesn't mean his time in Tampa is necessarily done, because I mean there are plenty of cornerbacks in the NFL who have carved out a pretty nice career and put a lot of money in the bank being a slot defender. So it's not necessarily the end of the road for Hargreaves, but I think as far as his status as a first round draft pick and how he's viewed in history of the Buccaneers squad is really dependent on this training camp and this preseason, maybe early season if the coaching staff decides to give him the first quarter of the season maybe to prove himself even then.
I was on record being very adamant about not wanting Vernon Hargreaves. To me, especially with the Bucs having a top 10 pick that year, granted they traded out of the top 10 and still drafted Hargreaves, but still taking him in the top 15, in a division where you're facing Julio Jones twice, you're facing Michael Thomas twice, you're facing, at the time, he was facing Kelvin Benjamin, he's facing Devin Funchess, he's facing these mammoth human beings, and he's, under 6 foot. It just, to me, it didn't sit right. Now, where I differ from David is if Vernon doesn't play well on the outside and he moves into the slot and he plays as well as he did in the slot last year, I do think they pick up his 5th-year option, because in today's NFL, a slot corner is essentially a starting position. You're still having to shut down a guy like, Odell Beckham plays out of the slot. Antonio Brown plays out of the slot. You have these elite receivers that still play in the slot. So you need a guy that can shut them down. The problem to me with Hargreaves is he's so tentative. When you see him play on the outside, he gives these ridiculous 10, 15-yard cushions to these receivers. You give a 15-yard cushion to Julio Jones, he can catch the ball at 5 yards and then turn it into 50 in the blink of an eye. You can't do that. But when he's in the slot and he's playing up and he's playing that press man coverage, he's far more effective. I think he's so gun-shy on the outside, afraid that these bigger and more athletic receivers are going to burn him if he plays up close, that it's kind of become a mental issue. And once, and David referred to it on our podcast as the yips in baseball. You get the yips, it's hard to overcome that mental hurdle. So, the coaching staff is confident in Hargreaves. I'm not as confident. That's why they drafted 2 corners in the 2nd round in MJ Stewart and Carlton Davis, and Davis has been turning heads. There are a lot of people very excited about what they've seen from Carlton Davis so far, but of course, again, we're going back to underwear football. They're in shorts and T-shirts and helmets. What's going to happen when he puts the pads on? But if you have a cornerback core of Brent Grimes and Carlton Davis on the outside and an effective, near-dominant Vernon Hargreaves in the slot, that's a pretty solid secondary. So I think if that ends up being the way things are laid out and these players are playing effectively, especially Hargreaves, again, going back to last season when he was in the slot, he was very, very good. I believe he was, for those that put a lot of weight in it, I'm not a big Pro Football Focus guy, but I know a lot of people are. He was the highest-rated corner 2 weeks in a row playing in that slot position. So I think if that is the case, they would still pick up his 5th-year option, because they'll realize that, yeah, he's not exactly the corner that we thought he could be, but he is a corner that is going to help this football team win games when we put him in a position to succeed.
Yeah, and you guys answered my follow-up question on Hargreaves too, as far as where does he most effectively fit in the secondary. And I noticed that too, that when he started playing in the slot more consistently, at least on a down-by-down basis, he did look like he felt a lot more comfortable. And as far as the Bucs drafting Carlton Davis, like you said, James, I mean, there's so many monstrous and physical specimens in the NFC period, but especially in the NFC South. And Davis is almost the perfect pick for them. I know, those of us that cover the Saints, we were pretty high on him coming into the draft. And we're really analyzing him as a possible 2nd or 3rd round pick. So I'll be interested to see what how he's going to do against some of those bigger receivers as well. As far as Brent Grimes, I mean, that man might play forever. He and Breeze might be eyeing each other up when they're each 75 years old. I don't know. Neither of them have aged very much at all in their styles of play. But nonetheless, The Buccaneers, as you guys pointed out, they finished last in the league in pass defense last year. 22 sacks up front, so they made a lot of changes there. Got some new pieces through the draft to help on the back end. I think anybody that goes up against Tampa Bay, though, other than Gerald McCoy, always has an eye on how fast that linebacking core is, especially your starting three. Quan Alexander, Levante David. My question to you, question one is, Kendall Beckwith got kind of messed up in an auto accident in the off season. How far is he along in his rehab? Will he be ready for preseason or game one?
I believe the last thing that I saw on him is he was going to miss the beginning of training camp, but he should be ready to go for the start of the season. Now, physically, with him being laid up with a shattered ankle, how physically ready can he be, as far as when week one rolls around? But it seems like he would be able to be in uniform by then. But yeah, he's still going to be out just a few more weeks. Training camp starting at the end of this month. But yeah, I mean, that was a pretty big blow when we heard that Beckwith was going to be out. And again, that kind of goes back to the Hargraves conversation, because Beckwith got a lot of time last season because of injuries to Quan Alexander and Levante David. The Bucs don't typically run a lot of 3 linebacker sets just because they have to have that third corner on the field so often. So we may not miss Beckwith quite as much as people believe, just because of the formations that they're going to have to put out there. And another thing that people have thrown out as another wrinkle is almost lining up Noah Spence as a third outside linebacker to basically just blitz on those passing downs and kind of fill that hole, while you have JPP and you have Vinny Curry on the edges of the 4-3 defensive line. So there's the option there. But yeah, I mean, as far as the linebackers, if there's anything that Buccaneers fans can really hang their hat on, it's that they have arguably the best linebacking duo in football in Quan and Levante. And I know Panthers fans are going to roll their eyes and say, no, it's Davis and Kuechly. But at the end of the day, if I'm picking a middle linebacker, to start my franchise with for the next 10 years, I will absolutely take Quan Alexander over Luke Kuechly, because as phenomenal as Luke Kuechly is, and I think he's potentially a future Hall of Fame player, he's also one concussion away from pretty much being out of this league. That man has taken so much punishment, and we've seen it year after year that he ends up getting these concussions, and I feel so bad for him, because he's a great player, and you don't want to see somebody, suffer those kind of injuries, especially with the knowledge that we have now of what concussions do and CTE and things like this. But you have to think that he's really putting his livelihood and his future in his own hands every time he goes out there with as many head injuries as he's had. So yeah, Levante and Quan they're incredible to watch. They're both just so fast, and they read plays just so quickly and so effectively that they're always swarming around the ball. And I know Falcons fans hate it when the Buccaneers play in Atlanta, because they know Quan is going to play out of his mind. His 2 best games of his career have been inside the Georgia Dome, and he's a huge fan favorite, for the entire fan base.
David, did we lose you?
No, I'm still here, guys. Yeah, I mean, I can't put it any better. I love Luke to death too. I think he's definitely one of the greats in this game. But again, if we're starting a franchise today, I'm taking Quan every time.
Where do you guys, and obviously we have a long training camp and 4 preseason games for this thing to play out. So there's going to be surprises, there's going to be disappointments. But on paper right now, what do you guys see as the biggest weakness on this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team right now?
Cornerbacks. That's where I see the biggest weakness, and that's not, I think Brent Grimes is great, but the the questions surrounding Vernon Hargreaves, where is he going to play? How is he going to play? Carlton Davis, a lot of excitement, a lot of hype, well-deserved, but again, we get to see the pads on. And even if he ends up being the starting outside corner and Vernon Hargreaves ends up being the main slot defender, I agree that I think that trio is probably going to be pretty good, especially if Davis plays well enough to take over that outside position. That means some of this hype has come to fruition. But behind them, Ryan Smith was not exactly a lockdown defender last year. He's got some athleticism to him, but it doesn't seem like everything is just kind of clicked yet. MJ Stewart is there. Jordan Whitehead is definitely looks more like a safety than a corner. So there's some other guys. J.D. Elliott's on the roster. I like him a lot, but I'm not sure that he's ready to really step into a real critical role. So some of it's depth, some of it's questions in the starters. Honestly, outside of Brent Grimes, we don't really know what we have in the Tampa secondary at the corner position. So that right there is my area of concern.
Yeah, and I'll agree with David, but I'll take it one step further, and I'll just say the secondary. Corner for all the reasons that David just listed, but then you do look at the safety position. You have a second-year player in Justin Evans who played very, very well last season. I believe it was either his first or second career start. He got his first interception off Tom Brady. There's not too many players in the NFL that can say their first career interception was against Brady. But next to Evans, you have Chris Conte, who is the punching bag for Buccaneers fans. Despite the fact that he played pretty well last season, he still gets a lot of hate. And then you have the rookie in Jordan Whitehead, who, we don't know what he's going to be. You have Keith Tandy, who played lights-out football 2 seasons ago, single-handedly won games for them on fourth down stops, on way or en route to a 9-7 record, and then got virtually no playing time at all last season. So you have a question mark there. So between the issues with Vernon Hargreaves and then is Carlton Davis going to start? Where does MJ Stewart fit in for the corners? You also have the safeties where, how well is Conte going to play? Is he just a placeholder until they get Whitehead in towards the middle of the season? Is Justin Evans going to suffer a little bit of a sophomore slump, or is he going to continue to improve and continue on that trajectory that we saw last season? So I'd say the secondary as a whole is still a big question mark that's going to make fans nervous, especially against guys like Drew Brees and Matt Ryan and Cam Newton in 6 of these 10 games, or 6 of these 16 games.
Well, and I at least I hope that a lot of your Buccaneers fans that follow you guys' work are tuning into the show tonight. I'll say this about Jordan Whitehead. I know he was a 4th-round pick, so any value you get from a 4th-round pick is just kind of gravy, especially if it's outside of special teams. But he played his high school ball about 15 minutes from me. And kind of followed his career being close by at the University of Pittsburgh. The kid has a lot of athleticism. Could get a little bit stronger, but he would definitely be a dark horse. In training camp, I'm interested to see what he can do for you guys. So I figured I'd throw that positive nugget out there. But on the other end of that, and doing what we do, guys, we all have the conversations and we do the articles ad nauseum this time of year. 2 weeks before training camp starts, who's on your training camp bubble? Who could be a surprise cut or maybe a trade? Those happen not often, but a surprise cut or a trade that might take people by surprise.
I don't know.
Oh. Go ahead, David.
I don't know about
you
trades,
let me go first.
But all right. I don't know about trades. I think the team's done trading. Honestly, I don't really foresee any trades happening. But honestly, I think Keith Tandy could end up being a surprise cut in training camp. Like James said, coming out of 2016, pretty much everybody expected Keith Tandy to have a major role in 2017. And at one point in training camp last year, Dirk Cutter was actually asked if Keith Tandy was considered one of the starting safeties on this team, and he pretty much said that the opportunity is there for Keith Tandy to become a starter on this roster and take hold of that that spot. And I can't remember off the top of my head that was before they brought in T.J. Ward or after. But either way, what happened from the end of 2016 to Coach Cutter saying that Keith Tandy had an opportunity to grab hold of one of the starting positions, to Justin Evans getting all the playing time. He got T.J. Ward coming in, Chris Conte having kind of a little bit of a bounce-back season himself. Keith Tandy ended up buried down there, and then you have Jordan Whitehead brought in. There's an undrafted kid out there who could potentially make some noise. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with Keith Tandy. I don't know. Maybe there was an injury we really didn't know about. I don't know really what led to his, I guess, fall off. I'll call it a fall off. I mean, I know he's not a national name, but as far as Bucs, the fan circle is concerned, there was definitely a fall off from expectations in 2017 and what we got. So I think Keith Tandy's a guy who, if he doesn't come back to form, so to speak, from what we saw at the end of 2016, with these young guys in and these new players in and some of the excitement surrounding some of them, he could be the odd man out there. He could find himself a free agent before the end of the preseason.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with Charles Sims. He signed a one-year deal, not a lot of money guaranteed. You brought in Ronald Jones via the draft. You had Peyton Barber emerge at the end of last season. You still have Jacquizz Rodgers, and then another guy that was turning a lot of heads in rookie minicamp, OTAs, and minicamp was Duke running back Sean Wilson. Yeah, and he has people excited. And Wilson has every bit of athletic ability and potential to unseat Charles Sims on this team. And one of the biggest complaints that Buccaneers fans had, and especially myself, was when Charles Sims was on the field, you knew what was coming. He can't run effectively between the tackles, and if you can't run effectively between the tackles, what good are you as a running back? So I think Sims and Wilson are going to have quite the battle in training camp, and it would not surprise me in the least if the Bucs go ahead and move on from Sims and have two rookie running backs next season to, try to beef up this run game and keep their offense from being so one-dimensional and keeping all the pressure on the arms of Jameis Winston and Ryan Fitzpatrick.
It's crystal ball time, fellas.
Oh, no.
Yeah, oh, yes. Now, boys, girls, families that have kids that are going to be going to college, anybody that's listening to this show, first and foremost, I'd never bet the kids' college fund on anything I say, but especially a month and a half before the regular season even begins. So, guys, we won't hold you to anything that you could possibly foresee either. But a couple things I wanted to fire out at you. Obviously, as we've talked about all night, New Orleans and Tampa Bay play each other in Week 1. It's a pretty important season opener. Division rivals, division games are always big in the standings. And as we also know, both teams will be missing an offensive star coming into the game. So, real quickly in general terms, as it stands right now, how do you see that Week 1 game playing out?
David, you want to go first, or do you want me to go?
I was hoping to think about it for a minute.
All right, I'll go first then.
All right.
I feel like it's fully possible for Fitzmagic, or Fitztragic, however you want to phrase it, to come out of these first three games at 1-2. And I would say that the most likely games that he could potentially win would be either New Orleans or Pittsburgh. And I say that for this reason. When you have a division rivalry, it doesn't usually matter how good or bad the teams are that are facing one another. And being so close to Cincinnati, of course, I'm surrounded by god-awful Bengals fans who stole your guys' catchphrase, by the way. Nobody seems to believe me about that.
I'll back you up. I know they had. I know they did.
It doesn't matter how good the Bengals were and how bad the Browns were. When the two of them played each other, it was always a shootout. So I feel like in these divisional games, there's always that chance because the teams know each other so well that anybody can win. And as far as the Pittsburgh game is concerned, Pittsburgh notoriously starts off relatively slow. They don't come out of the gates just destroying everybody. They seem to gain momentum as the season goes on. So I feel like those are the two most likely games for Fitzpatrick to be able to somehow escape with a victory and keep the Bucs at a modest 1-2 before Jameis returns. That being said, the game in New Orleans, you know, everybody's hyped. I know there's a large Buccaneers contingent who will be traveling to New Orleans for this game. They have set up there's a Buccaneers podcast that a lot of fans listen to. They've set up something that they've called a fan retreat. All the fans are staying in the same hotel. They're buying tickets in the same section. You know, there's going to be a large support for the Bucs there. But Drew Brees, Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, it's incredible how much talent is on the Saints team. And I think at home to start the season, it's going to be too much for Fitzpatrick to try to manage his way through that, unless Ronald Jones sets some sort of single game rushing record and they're able to control the clock and have the ball for 40 of the 60 minutes and really just dominate time of possession, keep Brees off the field. I can't see the Buccaneers escaping with a win in week one, barring any kind of major injury on either side.
Yeah, so I believe, a lot like James, I think that the best chance for the Buccaneers to pull off, if the Bucs go 1-3 without Jameis Winston, I think their best chance at a win is actually at home against Pittsburgh. However, I agree that, you know, division rivalries are always fun that way where, you know, but like you said, the teams know each other so well and they see each other so much. But I feel like there is enough of new blood in Tampa to put the Saints in a position where they're not going to know this version of the Buccaneers team that they're going to see, as well as this Buccaneers team, at least from a coaching standpoint, is going to know the New Orleans team that they're going to face. I think losing Mark Ingram for this game is going to hurt the Saints more than losing Jameis Winston is going to hurt the Buccaneers. And for that reason, I believe the Buccaneers can pull off a single-digit win, like one score win, not 8 points, but 7 points or less. I think they can pull out a win. Another reason is because I feel like this defensive line, this remade defensive line, is going to be boom or bust. I don't think there's really going to be a middle ground here. I think it's either going to work really well or it's not going to work at all. And if it's going to work really well, it's going to have to start in week one. So that's kind of where I'm going with that.
Well, Saints fans,
can I say something,
you heard
Bob?
James throw out the warning.
Bob, can I say something here?
Go right ahead, Kyle.
No, you guys make some great points, but I thought Disneyland was in California, not Florida. I know there's Disney World and Fantasyland, small world, but, you know, hey, look, guys, the one guy that scares me paired up with McCoy is that new kid, Vita Vea, and that's going to be a tough challenge for our offensive line. And what I hear from you guys is still the unknown of which Fitzpatrick you're going to get, right? And I think he's really the wild card there, Bob and guys, is that how well Fitz is able to play really dictates how well any of his teams have really gone and played, you know, while he's been in the NFL. If he makes mistakes early, it's usually a long game for that particular team. So hopefully you guys have a good challenge, but all of you Bucs fans that are coming to New Orleans, I'd like to say welcome to the city, but do not feel too sad when we have Kleenexes at the door for you.
Wow. I'm hoping all of our Saints fans that are listening he took James's words to heart, and go out and hurry up buy up all those tickets that are still available for that season opener. So that way, Kyle, I agree with you. Tampa Bay Buccaneers fans, you are more than welcome to hang out in the parking lot and the restaurants, and share a few beverages, make a few friendly side bets. But we love you, but we don't want you in our stadium on week 1.
Look, man, anything to help the New Orleans economy, bring yourself, spend a lot of money. We're okay with that. We're fine with the Bucs fans. And we don't really hate you guys. And that's the one thing. It's like what I hear from you guys, and I've talked to enough Buc fans over the years, is there's a mutual respect among the franchises, because at one time, I know growing up, these franchises had a lot of challenges to win games, right? And matter of fact, we lost a game against the Buccaneers that kept us from a playoff hope. We gave up a game that we could have won and had a good season here or there, but I've seen it all. I heard you guys say that Jameis Winston by far would be your best quarterback in history of the Bucs. I think Doug Williams will take some exception to that because, Doug did bring those guys to an NFC championship game before.
Oh, yeah.
And he didn't have much of a supporting cast back then.
No, not at all. And Doug Williams could have led the Bucs to a Super Bowl if the Bucs owner at the time hadn't been such a god-awful penny pitching racist. It's basically what it boils down to.
That's right.
He had no interest in paying Doug Williams because he didn't want to be shelling out money for an African-American quarterback.
Right.
And the things that could have been. With Doug Williams and Leroy Selman on the other side of the ball. And, that's one of the many dark clouds over Buccaneers history is that wonderful Hugh Culverhouse and his ownership of the team.
Exactly.
Well,
one thing that
you
concerns
guys pointed
me,
out some of the quarterback names that have been in and out, and Steve Young, Hall of Famer, Vinny Testaverde, who put together a pretty nice NFL career despite a rocky start. But none of them played well in Tampa. And guys, I don't know. Kyle, I know you did, but guys, I don't know if you catch any of my series through Canal Street Chronicles. New Orleans Saints triumphs and tragedies. When I write about the tragedies, I have a pretty lengthy list to choose from reaching back in the early 80s and the 1970s. And my tragedy that I wrote about today was, as you guys know, the New Orleans Saints were the first victim to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in their franchise's history.
Exactly.
So both teams certainly share some dark days, and I agree with Kyle. I mean, there's certainly a lot of mutual respect. Having said that, I think Saints Buccaneer games, they might not be entertaining from a historic rivalry point of view, but they're definitely entertaining as far as you don't know what's going to happen. It seems like every single year, no matter what happens, these two teams split. And you guys pointed out, a couple of individual players, looking at you, Chris Baker, that kind of checked out on the team down the stretch last year. And New Orleans had something to play for in that season's final game, and Tampa still took it to them. And that's a perfect example of what this kind of underrated rivalry has meant. Guys, not to interrupt, but we're just watching my son walk across the room for the first time ever, too. So congratulations to young
all right, congratulations, little guy. Yeah, all right.
Just in time for the party.
He got his wheels. Got his wheels now. Watch out, Bob.
Yeah, I know. I know.
I'll get a little Quan Alexander jersey in the mail immediately.
You know what? I'll post the pictures, and if you can get Mr. Alexander to sign it as well, we would be eternally grateful. We think his first little Saints jersey is going to be Mr. Lyndon Stevens, guest on our show a couple of times and fighting for a cornerback job with the New Orleans Saints. Hopefully you guys will get to see him in week 1. Really exciting prospect. But before we wrap it up, guys, and Kyle too, I wanted to get, and again, we'll play crystal ball. Nobody's holding anything to anybody here. But how do you see James David? I think we got a pretty good idea for what kind of feel you have for your team, and for your Week 1 opponent in New Orleans. How do you see the NFC South in general playing out in 2018?
I have no idea.
Nobody ever does. That's why we say crystal ball.
I think the Saints are probably going to win the division. I think that the Falcons and Buccaneers will be fighting for second place. I don't like the Panthers. James accuses me of not liking the Titans. I don't like the Panthers.
You flat out told me you hate the Titans.
Okay. We're gonna veer off on a tangent here for a second. I'm sorry. I don't dislike the Titans. I dislike the fact that the Houston Oilers left. That's what I don't like.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, the Titans jerseys were better anyway.
Ooh. Look, I can't.
Man. Give me
feel
some
bad about
Blue and Dan Pastorini.
Look, I can't feel bad about both because my cousin Steve Jackson played with the Oilers, then went to the Titans. So, yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I had to root for either or. But being here in Houston, that was a big blow to have. But to take these guys away from the city, So, but anyway, I understand how you feel about the Titans. Hey, let me ask you this, man. And my question, Bob, and I wanted to get it in earlier. Knowing everything about Jameis Winston, and I heard you guys have some trepidation about what's going to be his future with the Buccaneers. Do you believe that it's definitely not a talent problem that he has? It's a personality problem. Do you think he has gotten some help with some of mental help that he needed, some counseling? Because, when he ran out on the field to attack Marcus Lattimore last season, I was like, what's going on with the face of your franchise?
I think with Jameis, at least off the field, one of the big problems has been surrounding himself with the right people. Two of his biggest allegations against him, whether it was the one at Florida State or the one with the Uber driver, he was out with Ronald Darby that night. Obviously, if he's getting in trouble, and 2 times now, one of the key witnesses has been the same guy, you're not surrounding yourself with the right people.
Right.
I think alcohol was a big problem in his life. That's why he said he removed it. I also believe, and we saw it with Mike Evans, and I don't know if you guys remember a few years ago, last game of the season, the Bucs were getting trounced by the Panthers.
Right.
Mike Evans gets ejected from the game for arguing with an official for not throwing a pass interference flag. He gets married. He has a child. He kind of matures. Having a child changes a person. Now, it's not going to be an overnight change, but Jameis is now engaged to his longtime girlfriend, Breon. They just had a baby boy right before the 4th of July. That's going to play into it as well. And it came out yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, that he's been working with Randy Moss. And Randy Moss said the same thing, that you have to surround yourself with people that aren't going to be afraid to tell you no. And what Randy Moss had said was, I will be much more thankful listening to you tell me no right now than having you say you should have listened to me when I'm behind bars.
Right.
So it's about maturing, and people forget he came into this league at 20 years old. He's still, for all intents and purposes, he's a kid, and that's not an excuse for some of the immature things that he's done. But he has to be better about who he puts around him. He can't surround himself with yes men. He can't surround himself with people like Ronald Darby that brings in, I can't remember the guy's name, but a guy that's serving time for aggravated sexual assault for something that happened at Vanderbilt. those are not the kind of people that you surround yourself with and become a successful NFL player, let alone the face of a franchise.
Yeah, I was concerned about the fact that he was eating those W's. I was wondering if he was eating those, thinking those were the crab legs he left back at Publix. But
now TJ Ward was on Barstool Radio on Sirius, and he actually took the blame for that eating a W pregame speech. Based on a conversation that the two of them had in warm-ups, because that was a game before Thanksgiving.
Right.
So, it was a conversation between the two of them, and it was, Jameis asked him, are you hungry for this win? Are you ready? And Ward had said something about, I'm going to eat everything. I'm going to eat the turkey. I'm going to eat the dressing. I'm going to eat the W's. And there you have it. So, Jameis has had some great pregame speeches. That one was not good. But as somebody that covers the Bucs and somebody that has loved the Bucs for 2 decades, you kind of have to embrace it. If you embrace the whole eating a W thing, then other fans of other teams can't turn it on you. It's that whole thing where if you make fun of yourself, nobody else can make fun of you for it.
True. Well, hey, man, it's all good fun. I understand the intent was there, the execution. All right. We'll talk later.
Well, and I think, and I couldn't agree with either of you guys more than, you have to stick with Jameis right now. Since we are all fond of saying, for better or for worse, that this is a business, it has to be a business decision to stick with Jameis right now, unless something obviously egregious happens. And you do, taking football out of the equation, you do root for the young man, because, you guys pointed out, in the grand scheme of things, he's still a kid. And, you don't want to see a kid ruin his life because or livelihood because of stupid decisions. So when you factor football and, he plays for this team, so I'm not supposed to like him. When you factor all that out of it, these guys are still human beings. I think one of you just said he's a new father. So you take that into account. So we do hope that Jameis gets it turned around. And I do. I like his game on the field. I hope for the rest of his career, especially with Tampa Bay, that he has 2 absolutely awful games every season. But then after that, he's a fun quarterback to watch when he has it rolling. And Tampa has done him due diligence in surrounding him with some very skilled offensive weapons, particularly in the passing game at wide receiver and tight end. Something that the Carolina Panthers probably should have taken note of when it came to Cam Newton. They have given Jameis the on-the-field tools to succeed. It sounds like he's starting to reach out to improve the environment around him. Now the next step has to be his. He has to step forward and take accountability for his actions on and off the field. And I think Tampa Bay will be better for it. Did I lose you guys? I know I sometimes have some connection problems.
No,
I apologize.
I'm here.
Guys, is there...
I said, oh, yeah. I don't know if you guys heard me or not.
Okay. We've covered a lot of great things tonight, guys. Is there anything that we missed, that you want to let our fans or your fans know? What to watch out for as training camp approaches, or regular season, or maybe under the radar type of things.
No, on my end, I've enjoyed the conversation, and I'm just excited for the season to get started. And we'll even without Jameis, hopefully the Bucs can head over to New Orleans and eat them W's.
I think we pretty well covered it all. You guys, we definitely appreciate you guys bringing us on and thoroughly enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, anytime. Obviously, the first time we play each other this season is going to be the season opener, and everybody's crushed with preseason wrap-ups and things like that. But without cementing an answer now, I think I'm with Kyle when I say we'd love to have you guys back on during the regular season as well to check in. You guys have given our
Definitely.
fans some terrific information tonight. If you don't mind, tell everybody how they can find you.
Oh yeah, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at @Yarcho_Bucs, and that's YARCHO. You can find everything that I'm writing over at bucksnation.com, and of course, you can hear David and I on the Locked On Bucs podcast.
Yeah, and then on Twitter, I'm DH82_Bucs, and just like James, I'm on Bucs Nation and the Locked On Bucs podcast, so you can find all my stuff over there.
All right, guys, we got to connect online. Connect with us at Saints News, okay? And Bob, I know yours is what? At Bob Rose?
At Bobby R2613 on Twitter, yes.
Okay. All right, so yeah, let's connect, man, and definitely for the first, I guess, game of the season, we can be able to have you guys on the podcast or have Bob on your podcast to do a preview. We would love to help co-contribute, okay?
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. Enjoy your evening.
Thanks, you too.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, Saints fans and Who-Dats from all over the world. This is Kyle T. Mosley of the Saints News Radio Network with my man, Mr. Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz. Bob, how can everybody find you?
As we just said, I can be found on Twitter at Bobby R2613. And the articles and the Bayou Blitz replay that we post every week, not only on my Twitter page, but also through Canal Street Chronicles as well, at Saints CSC or at Saints News as well. Everything that we just mentioned can be found on Facebook, where we're extremely interactive. I'm Bob Rose on Facebook. David and James can both be found in their work on Facebook as well. Canal Street Chronicles has its Facebook page. Saints News Network has its Facebook page. Guys, if you can't find us, it's your fault. And I promise you, if you have football questions, comments, statements, suggestions, they are all welcome. So please reach out to us.
Definitely. And don't forget, you can go to www.saintsnewsnetwork.com and read all of our featured articles from Barry Hursters, as well as a few new writers that we have to the crew online. And last but not least, last week we gave a send-off to our friend and mentor, Coach Rick Gailey. He was laid to rest on Monday. Prayers to Miss Elaine and the family, Gailey family. Please be with them. Still is going to be some lost moments in her heart, missing her loved one of over 39 years. So just be with her and the family and keep them in prayer.
Yes, definitely. We love you, and we miss you, Coach. I hope the family and friends of Rick are doing well, and you're definitely in all of our thoughts and prayers.
Definitely. All right, Bob. Good show, man. And guys from the Bucs podcast, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Don't forget, you could go to www.saintspodcast.com and find this podcast as well as many others from the beat writers as well as the analysts of the New Orleans Saints online 24/7. This is Kyle T. Mosley with Mr. Bob Rose of the Bayou Blitz. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, and have a great week. Take care.